Let's talk today about blending coloured pencils with solvents. This isn't something that I've covered for a little while. Now, first up, one of the main reasons that you might want to use solvents is because generally speaking, it will create a smoother drawing faster. So if you want to create a background like this one, for example, you would have to spend a really long time building up lots and lots and lots of layers of the pencil until it looked as smooth as this background. Whereas if you use solvents, you do still need to build up a good amount of the pencil, but you can then blend it and it will create this nice smooth background that you can then build on a little bit more. Now in this video, I want to cover the key techniques that you need to know to blend with solvents, and then I can show you how to put that into practice by drawing this dahlia flower. Now the most important thing that you need to know is that you need to build up a decent amount of the pencil. If you just put down a small amount and then try and blend it, it's just not going to really do anything. You want to put down a goodly amount of the pencil and then blend that, and that is actually going to be able to activate something. And I'll show you in a second the kind of levels of pencil that I like to build up before using solvent. Now another thing that is so important to bear in mind is that you will need to build up the pencil in as smooth a way as possible. So generally speaking, if I'm wanting to blend with solvents, I want to end up with something that looks really nice and smooth. If I put down the pencil in a very scribbly way and then try and blend that with the solvent, it isn't going to hide those scribbly marks. So I always like to try and build up the pencil in as smooth a way as possible. Generally speaking, I like to build up the pencil slowly in a series of light layers. It's much easier to put down the pencil in a smooth way if building it up in this way. I find if you press hard, it's always going to look very scratchy. Putting down more light layers will create a better base. I also like to work in circular motions or oval motions. So rather than scribbling back and forth with the pencil, working in these circles just puts down the pencil in a much more even way. Next up, when you start using the solvents, you don't want to use too much. If anything, it's better to use too little than too much. You can always add more. Generally speaking, I like to pour my solvent out into the lid of the solvent pot and then use that, dip my paintbrush in, wipe it against the side, and I find that's generally the right amount. If I just put my paintbrush in and put it straight on the paper, it would just make a big wet mess. And probably the most important main technique before we start talking through the flower is that you want to test. So in my drawing here, for example, with this flower, I will be using polychromos pencils on a smooth Bristol board paper, and I'll be using the Zest-it solvent. If you're not using those exact same three materials, it could be that your solvent or your paper just responds in a completely different way. So rather than drawing out a full picture and then using the solvent and it doesn't behave how you expect, you want to test. Test on some little swatches, see how it behaves, maybe test some different types of solvent, because some will work better than others, although that's probably a whole other video. Now let's think about how this can be applied to an actual drawing. Before we get started, although I'm covering all of the key points in this video, if you want to go through it in a lot more detail, I do have a full Skillshare course. In the course, I cover not only all of the materials that you'll need, but also the key techniques, and we'll go through drawing this dahlia, as I say, in a lot more detail. I've included in the description a link for a free 30-day Skillshare trial, which is more than enough time to complete the course. Do check out that link in the description. So let's take a look at this flower. And I started off here by splitting it into two sections. So start off by building up all of the pencil that I will want to blend on the flower itself. And generally speaking, I like to start from the lighter colours and work my way towards the darker colours. So the lightest colour I can see on the drawing is yellow. So I can put down a light layer like we talked about, a light and smooth layer of the yellow, before then moving on to the next darkest colour. So from here, that would be the pink pencil. And I can use this pink to start mapping in those main pink shapes, as well as anything that is darker than that. So you can see reasonably quickly, I can create something that does look like a dahlia flower. I then want to carry on working through the colours from those lighter colours towards the darker colours. As I mentioned, I really want to build up a lot of the pencil here so that I actually have something to blend with the solvents. Now, one thing I'm not doing is spending ages marking in all of the details on the center of the flower. So on the center, there is a hugely detailed section. If I filled in all of those details now and then blended with the solvents, in all likelihood, I'm just going to end up losing all of the effort that I've put in. It'll end up being a big muddy mess. So I'm focusing much more on the larger petals towards the edge of the flower, the larger areas that I will want to blend, and then later on I can add all of the details of the center. So once I'm happy with the flower itself, I can then start focusing on the background. The background is something that I will want to be as nice and smooth as possible. This is a great area to be using the solvents on. And I can once again start from the lighter colors and work my way towards the darker colors. So starting off on the odd little patch that's quite a bright blue, and then I can start blocking in some of the green sections. And I'm literally looking at this background like it is a series of shapes. I'm not focusing on that it's probably made up of leaves, for example. I'm just looking at the shapes. So I can use a darker green to map in those key shapes and gradually work my way towards those darker colors. So I can start using some dark browns, some dark blues, even some black in some areas. And it's at this point that I would say that I have got enough of the pigment down that I can blend with those solvents. You can see that I have really taken my time to build up all of the pencil. If I put down less than this, it just wouldn't do anything. Now, I have already carried out lots of tests. I am confident that I know what the solvent is going to do. So I can now activate this and use the solvent on the pencil. Now, on the flower itself, I want to work one petal at a time. I don't want to just use the paintbrush over the whole of the flower. Again, it will end up blending all of my colors together and I will lose all of the work that I've put in mapping out all of those key shapes. So if I work one petal at a time, blending each one, and then move on to the next one, I'm going to get a much better base that I can add in all of those details. Now you can see what a huge difference this is making, and I think it's an even bigger difference on the background. So again, I can work section by section, generally starting from the lighter areas and blending towards the darker areas. If I blend the other way, it's just going to create, again, a big muddy mess. Now it's worth noting here that using the solvents is kind of changing the colour of the coloured pencils. I would say it's making them brighter and more vibrant, but it is worth being aware that it will look different after using the solvent. Now you can see towards the end here, what I have is a slightly patchy but much smoother base. Now before I can add any pencil over the top of this, I need to wait for this to completely dry. I don't want to try and put the pencil over the top of a still damp piece of paper. So I left mine for a good few hours, and then I can start off by focusing on the background. So I'm just going over it in the same way that I did before, but this time I'm much more focused on just smoothing out what we've got here. I don't need to be adding a huge amount of the pencil because all I want to do is smooth it out. I'm pretty happy with the level of vibrancy here. I'm very much working through the same pencils that I did before, just lightly going over the top, still in those circular motions to try and make it nice and smooth. And then what I'm left with at the end of this is a much softer background. I can now start working on the flower itself. So the main thing that I want to do here is really add all of the detail towards the center of the flower, all of that detail that I haven't added up until now. Now I can still lightly see my sketch outlines here, so that makes it all much easier. Now I want to really take my time building up all of this detail. This is probably the longest part of the whole drawing. Adding in all those details, I'm using a lot of the same pencils that I had done before, a lot of the same colors. And then once I've added in all of that detail, I can really start thinking about if the flower needs brightening up. So for example, I think it looks a little bit muted. Maybe I need to add in some more pink or some more red. And I also want to add in odd extra details like the little yellow spots on the end of all the petals. But it's very much a case of tidying up what we have here rather than needing to get everything looking perfectly blended. So I hope that shows how you can go about using solvents. All right, happy drawing guys, and I'll see you in the next one.